culture and philosophy of television. Next on Retro Serial. Hey everyone, welcome to Retro Serial. I'm your host, Ian C. I'm glad you could be joining me for today's podcast. On this podcast, we have returning guest, Dave Sundstrom. And on this podcast, we talk about TV, but we talk about the future of TV, the philosophy of TV, why TV was so important as we were growing up. So it's more like culture in TV. Originally, the idea was to talk about television shows that, even though we're Gen Xers, that we liked that our parents were watching, and kind of how that shaped us. But it turned into a much more interesting discussion than just that. So I'm excited for you to see this. And we're going to get straight to that interview. But before we get to that interview, please do me the honor of liking this program, subscribing to the channel if you haven't subscribed already, and please share it on your favorite social media. Those things are free to do, and they mean a lot to us here on the program. If you're interested in going a step further, you are always welcome to click the links below to the Patreon page or the Venmo page and throw a little scratch my way to grow this YouTube mogul empire. I want to thank you, and now with all that said, let's just get straight into the interview.
Hey everyone, guess who I got back with me on the channel? Dave Sundstrom. How you doing, my friend?
Oh, living the dream, Ian. Living the dream.
We were talking, oh man, things have gone kind of crazy for me in my personal life, and also here. I mean, I did see a significant jump in numbers when I did that video on Jason Bateman. That was great, and thank you for sharing it. Thank you for everybody for subscribing to share it, and for subscribing and sharing it. And it just, I'm still just plugging away. It's one foot in front of the other. And still working on trying to make this channel the best that it can possibly be. Hopefully soon in the near future, I might get a push forward. Been a while since we've been on either one of our channels. You haven't been on my channel for a while. I haven't been back on your channel for a while. Of course, your live streams, you haven't done quite as many of them these days.
Mm-hmm. No, I still probably do 2 or 3 a month, and then I do one for my channel members only, those people that subscribe as channel members. So there's probably 4, but the wild and crazy days of maybe even doing 2 a week are long gone.
Right. Well, I mean, part of the reason why I wanted to have you back on the program is because I had a subject in mind and an idea behind that subject, kind of a cultural idea that I thought you were the perfect person to run it by and discuss it with. And basically, I wanted to talk about shows that were more aimed at our parents, boomer kind of television shows, 50s, 60s, even into 70s, that weren't really aimed at us, but we enjoyed anyway. Maybe we enjoyed them when they were out. Maybe we enjoyed them as we got older. Maybe it's both. But I had the idea of talking about that, first of all, because this is a nostalgic program. And generally, I do Gen X stuff, which is, 70s, 80s, 90s kind of material. But I just watched a lot of television as I was growing up that wasn't 70s, 80s, 90s. It was like 50s, 60s, and 70s kind of stuff. And I enjoyed those shows, and they helped shape my life as much as the shows that came out in the 70s and 80s and 90s as well. And I had this little bit of a theory I kind of wanted to run by you, because I know that a lot of what you do on your channel is somewhat in that genre of Happy Days, other shows like that, Laverne Shirley kind of stuff. And a lot of my stuff is like Dukes of Hazzard, Family Ties kind of thing, because we kind of represent different planes in what's considered Gen X. And I think that the reason why is because there was a time when television was a family event. You sat around with your family, and so whatever you kind of watched with your family tended to rub off on you, or you tended to like to some degree. How do you think? What do you think about that theory? Do you think that theory holds any water? Do you find it true for your life in some of the shows you've come to love, or am I only being autobiographical here?
No, I think you're right. I think watching TV now is a completely different experience than it was when we grew up, Ian. It was appointment viewing. Even I think I've heard you say that you didn't immediately have a VCR in your home. We certainly didn't until the mid 80s. And so that meant during the 70s in particular, if we wanted to watch a television show, one member of the family couldn't watch it at one time and another one at a different time. We all had to gather around the TV set at the same time and sometimes argue about what that one show was we were going to watch Tuesday at 7 p.m. But we would watch it together, and it was something that brought us all a little bit closer because of that.
Yeah, yeah, and I do tend to think that I don't think this is going to sound weird. I don't think that the generation kind of growing up now is going to experience that. I think
Nope.
us and maybe millennials are kind of the last generation to kind of do that. Millennials a little less because as you get into the 80s and 90s, everybody has a TV in their own room. And now, I mean, we're growing up with a generation that the show starts when you push play,
Yep.
and so sitting around to watch a television show and argue about what we should watch is nearly a thing of the past. Nobody needs to argue about what we need to watch or what we want to watch.
There's no reason to miss a show anymore. If you want to watch it, it's there.
Yeah, if you or just that, you can have your child sitting next to you on his iPhone or whatever, watching the show they want to see while you're watching the movie that you want to see, kind of a thing. So, I mean, for personal entertainment value, I think that may have some merit to it. But at the same time, the struggle there that kind of bonded us together as families is a little bit out the window, right?
Yeah. We'll sit down and watch a movie as a family, and I'll look over at, I don't know, however many boys are there with me, and sometimes even over at my wife, and they'll all have their phones out, TikToking or looking at something on YouTube, and they're multitaskers. They're kind of watching the movie, but the experience is dramatically different than it once was.
Yeah.
And I think for that reason, the shows are very different too, Ian.
Yeah, I mean, what? Yeah, we'll expand on that. What do you mean the shows are different? Let's talk about that for a second.
Well, let's think about what's out there in the television landscape these days. It's most of what we have out there. I mean, there are still some dramas, some hour dramas, and a handful of sitcoms. But for the most part, we're dealing with reality shows. Hundreds and hundreds of reality shows that really don't require the same level of attention that a show did back in the 60s, 70s, or 80s. Back then, if you missed a critical plot point, you were kind of in the dark. Nowadays, a lot of these shows that you watch on HGTV, Food Network, or even any of the big three networks, right? If you miss something, no biggie. It's not critical.
Right. And now you have the option, even if you do miss something, to run it back at whim. Sure. You don't, I mean, the closest we had was a VCR and then maybe later a DVD player where you can kind of run it back. But you can just run it back really kind of quickly right now to see what you missed it. And it does kind of, so you can look down at your phone and miss, 5 minutes and look back and then go, oh, well, I missed it. And it doesn't matter either because the plot's too thin and it doesn't matter, or because even if it's thick, the plot's thick, you can just kind of roll it back and see what you missed. Yeah, it's gonna be a wildly different generation, and I'm looking forward to it in some ways. I have a lot of hope for it in a lot of ways, but I also am a little bit skeptical about what the future is going to look like for a lot of different reasons.
Yeah, definitely some pros and cons.
Yeah, some pros and cons. So let me ask you a question then on this to get biographical with you. Do you remember some of the debates in your home? Was there a particular show that you wanted to watch that your parents didn't, or your brother wanted to
Yeah,
watch?
I'm worried that I may have already shared this with you, but I'll share it again. What the heck? Uh, so Battlestar Galactica was a show that I really wanted to watch badly, but I grew up in an extremely conservative Christian home that my father kind of laid down the law on watching television on Sundays. There was no sports to be watched, nothing that had any sort of violence or anything in it. And Battlestar Galactica fit we can't watch it because it's violent. That wasn't something we'd want to watch on the Lord's Day. And so as a kid, I couldn't watch that. And then they moved it to Wednesdays. I mean, it was on the verge of being canceled. So these were just reruns in the summertime, right? But they moved it to Wednesdays. And Little House on the Prairie was on Wednesdays at the same exact time, which was my sister's favorite show. And so, yeah, there was a tremendous amount of arguing over Battlestar Galactica or Little House on the Prairie. Usually my sister won those arguments. Parents, for some reason, tended to favor her when it came to those things. Maybe just because, in retrospect, how can you go wrong with Little House on the Prairie?
Right. It would be a little less skeptical. I mean, I'm thinking, like, how can you go wrong with Battlestar Galactica? Personally, but again,
it appealed to me, and Little House on the Prairie appealed to pretty much everyone else.
Yeah,
that's how. And Steve was too little to argue in favor of it at that point.
So were you a Little House on the Prairie fan, or were you more of a Waltons fan? I think I've asked you this before, but it's been long enough. We can rehash it again.
Liked them both a lot. Both.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Probably, though, if I had to pick one, with the Waltons, just because I identified a little bit with John Boy.
Oh, okay. All right. So there's some identification going on there. Yeah. That's cool. I think that's how it works. You kind of identify with somebody. Mm-hmm. I probably would have liked the Waltons a little bit better if I watched it more. I remember watching it every time I saw it. It was good. It was good, and I enjoyed it. But I don't know if it was just not on when we were watching TV or whatever. I saw Little House on the Prairie much more. And so I just tended to gravitate toward Little House on the Prairie. But I have a feeling that if I watched the Waltons more, I probably would have been more of a Waltons fan than a Little House on the Prairie fan. As a matter of fact,
both great shows.
Yeah. Both great shows. Now, speaking of plots, this is something that I kind of want to talk about. We're talking about boomer shows that we loved, and I'm going to throw one out there. A lot of times I talk about comedic shows on here. I'm going to throw something out that wasn't a comedy, and that is one of the shows that I truly enjoyed. And I think that part of what filters into this and this whole conversation is thicker plots. There's less CGI, especially when you're dealing with 50s and 60s. Less special effects. It's got to be a good story. And one of them that I absolutely loved was the Wild Wild West. Mm-hmm. Were you a fan?
Loved it. Absolutely loved it. Loved both, of course, Robert Conrad, Ross Martin. Fantastic actors. Ross Martin may actually, everybody loves the hero, James West, but Ross Martin as Artemis Gordon was just fantastic in that role and really owned it. And that combination of the West with a little bit of James Bond and a little bit of science fiction built into it really worked. I mean, it was really one of the first steampunk TV shows out there.
Yeah. And it's interesting to go back and kind of watch their technology because of the steampunk aspect to it. They had to have everything was very mechanical, not electric kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was fun. One of the things I really liked about it was the house was it a saloon? I can't remember if it was a saloon or a house. And every time you go to commercial, a part of the house would go into color or something. Do you remember that?
I never thought it was a house. I just thought it was these segments in you had blocks and segments, and I never viewed it as a house.
Oh, okay. I thought it was a structure.
So the scene would freeze and it would go to cartoon, right? And it would become a block in the whatever it was, the frame that has in the center the Wild Wild West.
Yeah. I thought it was either a house or I could be wrong. It was a saloon, but you didn't see it that way. That's interesting.
I didn't pick up on that. No.
What? So as you're growing up and you're sitting around watching TV with family, what are some of your earliest shows that you remember that you really enjoyed watching then? That you've come to enjoy that you really feel like you liked.
There's two. There's the shows I really enjoyed that I watched by myself because I was a huge couch potato / TV bug. And then there were the shows that we watched as a family. If you're talking about shows that we watched as a family, the Carol Burnett show was one of them that I remember watching as a family. We did watch Little House on the Prairie as a family. Trying to think, some of the crime dramas. My dad liked Barnaby Jones and The Magician in the 70s that he'd watch, and I remember watching with my parents, not necessarily the family, but with my parents, the Andy Griffith Show and The Rifleman. Those are all shows that I watched with family, either my parents or the family. When I was on my own, I'd watch things like Gilligan's Island, Star Trek, Batman, more the fantastical stuff that the other members of my family, particularly my parents and my sister that was just a little bit younger than me, none of them really seemed to enjoy those shows as much as I did.
Okay. Very well. Yeah. I mean, I could kind of see. I could see that. Was there shows that you watched that were like? Almost like shows that parents would enjoy, but they were more like for kids that were like like the TV babysitter thing. Was Batman like that for you, or no? Like your parents would let you watch Batman because then there's a half hour with Dave not worrying.
My parents really weren't. My parents weren't big TV people, so when they watched it, it would be an event almost in some ways. It wasn't something that we watched with the level of frequency that people watch these days, to your point, as a babysitter, or sometimes people just enjoy having it on as noise, as company in a home, right? TV seems to be a constant presence in some homes when you can walk into them. And that was never the case. As a matter of fact, there were months when, it's kind of ironic, a guy that loves TV as much as I do and talks about it on my YouTube channel. But there were months when we didn't have a functioning TV. I remember there was a point, wow. You'd have tubes burn out in the 60s and 70s before transistors really took over television sets. And tubes would burn out, and the old man just didn't have the money to go replace that tube right away. I remember just listening to shows because the tube didn't work. Whatever. Well, not the big tube, but whatever tube was back there that was, literally stopped the picture from working. And I just turn it on sometimes. But my parents, their idea of if they wanted us out of their hair, it was go out and play. Uh-huh. We were pushed out the door and told to go play. And, I lived in a neighborhood in the late 60s, early 70s where parents literally you'd walk out the door at 8 a.m. in the summertime and maybe not return home until late in the evening, and no one worried about it a bit, even though you were 6, 7, 8 years old. That was just there's that feeling of safety and security, and so we weren't really hanging around the house, and there was no need for babysitters, for a television to be a babysitter.
Yeah. Well, that's good. Did you have the inside or outside rule? Like if you went out in and out too
What's that?
much, you got to pick. Well, you had to pick one. Did you ever run in and out and in and out, and then your mom said
Oh no, I
inside or
never got the
outside?
inside out rule. I never
Inside.
got that rule. I
Oh,
never got that. I told that I
uh,
have a rule too, and it's more of a saying I said to my boys growing up because it's totally true. Because they would do it a lot, right? They'd run in inside of the house and out, but it wasn't really the running in and out that would drive me crazy with my boys. It was that they'd leave the door open. And so the
oh
rule that I
gosh.
would always tell them is just it's not even a rule. It's just advice. It's a words of wisdom, which is bugs love to come in, but they don't like to come out. So I really wanted them to adhere to that rule of closing the door so that I wouldn't have to fight the flies and other things that might wander on in and never want to leave.
Yeah, yeah. Do you think now? Do you think there are any television shows out there? Oh, before I get to that, I did want to say, yeah, I remember being able to go outside and play without any worry or any
Yeah.
trouble at all. It was a good time. We had the whole, obviously in the '80s, the whole kidnapping scare that kind of reined
That
that
was kind of
in.
the beginning of the end, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah, you remember the McGruff houses
Oh
and
yeah.
things like that, that if you saw somebody, you could
Yeah.
run into a house that had McGruff on the door. I think, for me, it was when the street lights went on. That was, I'd better be home when the street lights were on. That was the cue. Or I had better have had made arrangements. I'm
Right.
staying at somebody's house or something like that. Of course, that didn't happen a lot during the weekend. I mean, during the week, but more or less during the weekend, unless it was summer.
Summertime. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So that was okay. I think the other thing that kind of put a kibosh on it is just electronic devices, as we were saying.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, now it's not just, oh, I'm scared of stranger danger out there. It's, well, I've got more going on here than than what's the need to go outside. Um, and of course, we could go on a whole tirade about that as well. But your children probably kind of grew up in between that phase, right?
They are pretty much kids that, I mean, they would play outside, but they definitely adhered to the philosophy that there was more things fun to do inside than out. They've always
Okay.
had video game systems and oodles of entertainment at their fingertips, and so when friends come over, they either would often be playing video games or watching a movie or something.
Interesting, interesting. Well, and to the other point too, there were shows, that I do believe about, that were like there to babysit me. Like it would be
Yeah,
on, I'd be out of the way, especially Saturday morning stuff. As I said, I was raised kind of with a single mom, and so she needed her sleep on the weekends or whatever day she had off, and Saturday mornings in front of the TV. She could hear the TV. She knew where I was. No, no big deal. But a lot of outside time for me as well. Uh, I'm interested in, are there any boomer shows that you didn't watch and that you go back now and you watch now, and how do you feel about those shows? You love them, you hate them, they're good, they stand up to what your expectations. Are there any shows like that now that you're kind of, that were of that generation, that you go back and you watch that you didn't
yeah,
see in its original?
right. There are. I've been particularly with we have lots of great opportunities to go back and revisit these shows now. With whether it's MeTV or something like Tubi, there's just oodles of old timey programming that one can access, and so I've gone back and revisited shows that I'd heard things about that thought maybe I just missed the boat the first time around. Because shows for me like Star Trek and Batman and Andy Griffith, my top three TV shows of all time, by the way,
Yeah,
those shows are timeless. They're timeless. Mayberry is a timeless place. Star Trek, you can look at the special effects and say they're a little dated, but those stories are timeless. Batman because of the weird, campy way that movie or that television series was made. It just feels timeless. Again, it doesn't feel like any particular era. But you go back and, for example, I've been going back and watching late '60s science fiction lately. So shows like the Time Tunnel, Irwin Allen shows, Time Tunnel, and Land of the Giants, and hoping that it would still have that same timeless feel, or that I would get that same level of enjoyment that I might on another one that's timeless as Twilight Zone. Just because it's anthology based and the stories, they're fantastic. The writers of the Twilight Zone were incredible. But I have to admit that in many cases I'm disappointed by what I see. I think that people that talk fondly, and I don't mean to diss anyone's favorite shows, but I think a lot of shows out there that are fondly remembered, and they can be fondly remembered, right? There's nothing that doesn't mean you're wrong if you enjoy a show, but as I go back and watch some of these shows, they don't hold up for me the same way that Star Trek does, for example, like the Time Tunnel. It's a great premise, but it just doesn't hold up the same way that Star Trek does. I'm trying to think about comedies. One that I really wanted to watch, I really wanted to enjoy was My Living Doll. Have you ever heard of that one?
No.
It was one that I hadn't heard about at all. It starred Julie Newmar, who was Catwoman in the Batman TV series. Mm-hmm. Very, very voluptuous and sexy lady in the 60s. They made a movie about her. Tu Wong Fu, what is it? Julie Newmar or something like that. It has Patrick Swayze in it.
Okay.
But anyway.
Tu Wong Fu with Love.
Yeah, Julie Newmar. I think that her name's in the title. Maybe not. Maybe. But anyway, there's a show called My Living Doll, which is it's a mid-50s or mid-60s show about this guy that works at a NASA Space Center or some science lab, some sciencey place for the government, and they've created an android, a robot, in voluptuous female form, and through a series of hijinks and shenanigans, he ends up with her in his apartment, and has to keep her there because the project has been scrapped, and so it's supposed to be this crazy funny comedy about this guy who has this sexy robot woman who's kind of his girlfriend, kind of not.
Kind of like a genie, like an I Dream of Jeannie kind of thing.
It is kind of like an I Dream of Jeannie. And again, there's things to like in it, but it just doesn't hold up the same way some of the other shows that do out there. And I think the same thing is people 20 years from now are going to be talking about shows in the 2000s to 2010s the same way, right? They're just going to say,
right.
There's some shows that are great and some shows that are not so great, but they still have their fans. And so you're going to have people say, you should watch this. It's awesome.
Well, to the point too, I've never even heard of Time Tunnel. I have heard of Star Trek. And I've watched Star Trek. You know what I mean? There is something to be said. Every once in a while, you'll have a television show or a movie or a band that falls through the cracks that you think should have been bigger. And there are some of those that rightly should have been bigger, are more liked, but for the most part, it's not true. The reason why they weren't liked is they weren't that great. They weren't terrific shows to begin with, or there wasn't a terrific enough band to really get traction on it and stuff like that. So a lot of people say that as far as music goes, there's a band called the Dandy Warhols. Have you heard of them?
Sure. Yeah, sure have.
Yeah. They had a cult following, and I was one of the people who kind of checked them out in retrospect. And again, not to mess with anybody's favorite band or whatever, I was just like, well, there's kind of a reason they didn't get as big as they were, And probably the same thing happened for a movie or a television show like The Time Tunnel. we talked about Star Trek today. We have Star Trek conventions. And while somebody might be really upset who's a real time tunnel advocate fan, at the same time, it wasn't as good of a program. You can blame the advertisers and the pushers and say nobody did their job, and if they all would have done their job, we would have been talking about time tunnel instead of Star Trek today. Well, quite honestly, probably not. Probably not. They are fun to watch. Personally speaking, I have so many boomer shows that I didn't watch. But the ones that I did were memorable to me, and the ones that I did watch too, I still find them to be extremely good. Like we were talking about, like Wild West. I mean, if you put on Wild West today, I would still enjoy the Wild Wild West.
It holds up.
Yeah, for sure. And one of a couple of the shows that I think really hold up is Leave It to Beaver. I think that show is still one of the funniest shows ever. If they like, it's so funny that if they made it today, like we're living in an alternate universe, not we're remaking it, not we're rebooting it, but if they remade it today, it would be funny. I think people would love it. If it was just a younger cast and, with people, but the same show in color, HD, same stories, I think that people would like it. A couple of stories obviously would be dated. We'd have to wonder why they weren't, talking about their computer or something like that. But I think that I just find it to be hilarious today. Is there any show for you that you think that, like, if you lived in alternate, they didn't make it then, but they made it now, that you think would do well today? Like as good as the Goldbergs or something like that. And it doesn't have to be comedy either. It can be whatever.
Yeah. Well, I think there's shows that hold up, and for that reason, I think that they could be as good today if they were remade. But it's almost like, I hate to say them because I don't really want them to be remade. Like they did make a Leave It to Beaver movie in the early 2000s, and it was okay. It had a talented cast, and it even included Barbara Billingsley in it, not playing the same character, but playing another character, and it was all right.
I don't mean it like in a reboot sense. I mean it in an alternate universe sense. Like Leave It to Beaver was not made in the 60s, but was made today instead. I think the stories and the humor in Leave It to Beaver would hold up. I mean, there'd have to be some of it, obviously would be modernized, but I think it would be. I think some of the shows that you have done stuff on. I think I Love Lucy probably would be. I still think that show's really super fun.
Yeah, I like that show as well. Gilligan's Island would be one that I think could be made at any time, or that concept of you bringing 7 disparate identities, types of people with one kind of guy that's goofing things up all the time, and that's just comedy gold, and I think that would work in any era. I don't think that the Andy Griffith Show would work in any era. I think its time came and went. I think, unfortunately, as a society, we're not gentle enough, we're not kind enough to deserve the Andy Griffith Show anymore. But other shows that potentially would be fun to see if they had never been made. That's what you're saying. If they'd never been made, I'm trying to think what kind of shows I would enjoy watching now. Hogan's Heroes is one that I would be fun. Again, I don't think it could be made today because I think that we're too sensitive. I think even back then there were people that said, "Why are you making light of the World War II?"
Right.
If anyone really watched that show, they understand that the only people that were being made fun of were the Nazis
yeah.
and the Germans. There were a lot of people involved in the making of that show that deserved to be there and had ancestors who had been there and experienced some of the real horrors of that. But anyway, so Hogan's Heroes. Happy Days is one that I think works. It worked. You mentioned the Goldbergs, and the reason Happy Days works, and it worked again with the Goldbergs, although it was slightly tweaked a little bit, is the whole premise is go back 20 years and create a show about that. In the 70s is when Happy Days debuted, and we got the 50s. In the Goldbergs debuted in 2010, somewhere around there, and we got the mid 80s, so 25 years. And all it's doing is pulling on your nostalgic heartstrings. That's what those shows do. They make you, whether it's true or not, you yearn for a simpler time. Things feel simpler when you look back 20 years. You don't remember all the crazy things that made your life feel as hectic and as miserable as it does now. You just remember the good times, and that's why those shows are so appealing. So I fully expect in another 15, 20 years we'll see a show about the early 2000s and how awesome it was.
Right. Well, we've already got like that 70s show, and then they had that 90s show, which was like that 90s show is a disaster to me.
Haven't watched it.
Great concept. I would have loved it. 90s was a big decade for me as a young adult, and of course I wasn't a child then, but I always thought, well, they should make they tried that 80s show. I don't know if you saw any episodes of those, but
I didn't watch any of that either.
You can watch them free. It was okay. It just didn't catch on like that 70s show did for some reason.
Right.
No, that 90s show is terrible. I'm sorry. I mean, it's,
even with Red and Kitty in it.
It's that part's awesome, but the kids are more like kids today than kids in the 90s, and that really, I mean, with all the sensibilities and all the, it's just like we weren't thinking. I was around that age, maybe a few years older in the 90s, and I wasn't thinking that way at all. It's more like what kids today are thinking and struggling with and going through and things like that. So I did not care for it. But that said, I do have another kind of challenging question for you when it comes to boomer television shows. Was there a show that you felt like you grew out of? Like maybe it was appealing to you during that time, during your growing up years, but as you go back to it, it's not quite what you remember. You're not quite as fond of it as you remember, or just you simply grew out of it. You went back and watched it, and it just isn't the same show for you. I mean, nothing's going to be exactly the same, but there's a sense of where nostalgia kind of outweighs all the little inconsistencies and stupid stuff that we see. So I don't know if there's any. I'll tell you one for me. It's Growing Pains. I loved Growing Pains as a kid. And it was basically ABC's version of Family Ties. And as much as I enjoyed it as a kid, I go back to it, and it's so bad. The stories are so cheesy, and there's a sense in that even with Family Ties, which I was a bigger fan of Family Ties. Back then, I was a big fan of Family Ties and a big fan of Growing Pains and a big fan of Mr. Belvedere. believe it or not, Mr. Belvedere is the better of the three shows today. It is. It's got almost like a cult classic kind of feel to Mr. Belvedere than the other ones do. But it was such a good show then. But I go back to it, and it's not even like cheesy in the sense that I can enjoy it. It's actually cheesy in the sense that I don't enjoy it.
Yeah. Yeah, I still enjoy them. It's interesting. You watch things with different eyes these days, right? And I don't get the same level of excitement that I did out of some shows back in the 60s and 70s. A good example is Happy Days. I mean, I thought Happy Days was just one of my favorite shows, and it still is. But as I watch it now, I because of life experiences, it just doesn't resonate with me on the same level. Fantasy Island's another one. I mean, I feel bad bringing up these shows that are, I still watch them and I still enjoy them, but as I watch them and enjoy them, there's an acknowledgement that there's an element of cheesiness that simply can't be denied. And you just have to embrace the cheese if you're going to enjoy those programs now. Now, there are shows, I love bringing up Batman, love Batman. But there was a period, and I think the same holds true with Andy Griffith, never with Star Trek, but with Andy Griffith, but there was a period where I thought I'd grown out of it. Loved those shows as a kid. And then I became into my late teens, early 20s, basically maybe my entire decade of the 20s, where I thought, that's stupid. Those are stupid shows. Those were silly. Barney Fife, or just the craziness of Batman and just the silly things that Batman would say that would escape the kids, but the adults would chuckle about. All those things made me think, I won't enjoy these shows anymore. And then a strange thing happened in the 30s, and particularly as I got even a little bit older, and I went back and revisited those shows. I discovered that I could enjoy them on a completely different level. They weren't overly cheesy. Batman, you could argue, is, but it's designed that way. The camp humor, it's part of the mechanism of the show, that what makes it timeless. And all of a sudden, those shows, which I had literally, in particular Batman and Andy Griffith, I literally cast aside and said I would never watch again, have become my favorite shows, and the shows that I go to routinely when I just want to watch something that's, like comfort food, the television equivalent of comfort food. I always go to one of my three favorite shows just to relax.
Yeah, I get that too. That's a good way to put it. It's like comfort television, comfort food. There's a considerable amount of that for myself. I mean, and some shows you grow out of, and it's kind of like weird where society is. I was even thinking about that with I Love Lucy, because I Love Lucy is such a funny show because of the misadventures that happen in it. But I mean, the way Ricky treats her on some occasions just wouldn't hold up today. It just would be. It's just so funny. It's like, you're a wife, you're supposed to stay home, you're not going to be at the club, kind of a thing. The boys are out at the club. This is what boys do. I think that is just something that would be terrible. I don't know, would go over like a Led Zeppelin today.
It wouldn't play out well these days.
No. On the other hand, and this is another question that I have. Is there any television shows that you never grew out of? Like, there was never a dull point in it, like you found yourself, whenever it was on, enjoying it? Even up through today, there wasn't a period where. I get it with Batman. I mean, I totally do. You get a little bit older. Well, that's a little stupid, little kiddie.
I think it probably would have to be. Yeah, I think it would have to be Star Trek, Ian. It's the one, right? Because you had Star Trek, and then you had reruns in the 70s, and then you had the animated show, which was really good. In the I think it debuted in '73 and ran until '75 on NBC on Saturday mornings, and then those played in reruns, and then you had this 5-year, 6-year period where nothing. You just rumors that there was going to be a new Star Trek TV show, rumors, and all of us were so excited about it. And then the movie came out. And it was, some people call it Star Trek: The Motionless Picture. Other people love it. I'm somewhere in between on the first one. But then Wrath of really, there's been no looking back since Wrath of Khan, because then we had the great movie series with the original cast. We had Next Generation. Now, some could argue, and I would say that I certainly haven't followed all of the different iterations of Star Trek that are out there. There are just so many these days. But that is a show that I never stopped loving, and I could always go back to, whether watching original Star Trek, cartoon Star Trek, or Next Generation. I think they hold up. You can argue the special effects on some of them. I know CBS has gone back and fixed a lot of stuff, and they're critics of that as well. But I think when they've gone back and redone the special effects to make them look like they're '60s special effects, but done them with computers, I think it looks pretty good. And then they've done that with the original Star Trek series, and that's really enjoyable to watch still, and it always has been for me.
I will have to look at that. I did not know that they have gone back
to YouTube. Go to YouTube, and there are people that have actually done side-by-sides of certain Trek episodes. And the great thing about it was CBS said was, as they remastered those episodes, they said, you know what, let's fix the really bad stuff in there. But as we redo this all with CGI, it's all computer-generated special effects now, let's make them look like they were '60s special effects. So it's clean, it looks good, but it doesn't look out of place. It looks perfectly. They just did a really great job of inserting those new special effects in there, so you're not taken out of the moment and saying, "Oh, look what they did! They fixed it, or they ruined this." Instead, it's just seamless, and it's really good. So yeah, check out a couple of those YouTube videos, and then if you haven't, I don't know how much Trek you've watched, but that original series is just phenomenal.
Honestly, the original series is something I've gotten into as I got older. When I was younger, I found it. I was a kid, so I didn't hate it or anything like that. It just didn't appeal to me greatly. And then, of course, I was all on board when the Next Generation came out. And I think when the original, I wasn't born when the original one came out, but it was high in reruns when I was a kid, and watched it to a degree when I was a kid. But I was a young kid, in the '70s. I was a young kid in the '70s, so there wasn't the action content for me as much, and so for me as a kid, the idea of a sci-fi movie is the sci-fi was a secondary. It was the action that really kind of drew me into it, the Star Wars kind of thing. So I was a big Star Wars fan ever since I was 4 years old, ever since it came out. But again, as I got older and I really started to enjoy the stories of them much more. And now, when I watch a sci-fi film or a television series, the stories has got to be there. It's got to be a good story placed in a science fiction atmosphere, not just an action movie placed in a science fiction. I want to see a really good, intriguing story, and that's what I respect. That's what I love about Star Trek right now, is those stories were just good, and they had to rely on the stories then, because they didn't have the amount of special effects that they had. That we have today. It wasn't like, we can just make anything explode. It costs us no money because it's all CGI generated. If you wanted something blown up or something, you had to actually blow something up. It was pretty difficult to do, or it was cost expensive. Or if you wanted to throw a meteor or something, somebody actually had to make that thing and throw it, and took time to be able to do that. And so there was a lot of thought that went into the actual story. Same as we were talking about with like Gunsmoke and things like that. The Rifleman. Was that the name of it? The Rifleman? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Those were good. Those were really good stories. I almost feel like in my opinion, there's a parallel between science fiction and Western stories. It's got to be a good story. The action's got to be good. It can't be stupid action, but the story has to come first to really make it a great Western or a great science fiction show. So if you were to give, winding it up here for the hour-ish mark, if you were to give a recommendation to 5 television shows that somebody today, they're turning 18, and they say, I want to know 5 really good shows of that generation, what would be those 5 shows? I know 3 of them already, but you got to name them again. But I want 2 more on top of them.
Yeah, Twilight Zone.
Okay.
Batman, Star Trek, Andy Griffith, and I'm trying to think if there's a 5th one. You mentioned Leave It to Beaver. I love, but I don't know if I'd recommend it to an 18-year-old.
Oh, okay. All right.
Whereas those other 4 are, I don't know. I just don't know about Leave It to Beaver these days. I mean, I love it. Jerry Mathers, I love you. You're great. And by the way, the former Mr. Larry Mondello, actor Rusty Stevens, who has not acted in decades, you are incredible in Leave It to Beaver. If you ever watch this video, just know how awesome you are. What else? I think I'd probably go with something.
Wild West. I Love Lucy.
It's a good one, but if I've got to narrow. I've given you 4 off the top of my head. I don't want to waste this last one. Why don't you give me your 5, and then I'll give you one more.
Okay, so I would definitely choose Leave It to Beaver. I would definitely choose I Love Lucy. I think they're funny. For me, the mishaps in them are so hilarious. The miscommunication. I just love that. And I would definitely choose Twilight Zone for sure. That would be another one because those are great stories. Star Trek would be number 4, and boy, number 5 would be a difficult one. Probably Batman, number 5. I mean, I think that would be a good one for somebody to watch. If I was to choose 5 that I think that might hold somebody's attention, and they said, "Hey, I'm kind of getting into this. Maybe there's a project or something that they have to do," and I had to choose one, I think I would. I think I would choose those. Maybe Brady Bunch or something like that.
I just watched a couple episodes of the Brady Bunch the other day. It's cheesy, but it sure is fun still. It's a tie. So we already talked a little bit about the Rifleman, but not so much because of the Western. Obviously it's a Western, but I just love the story of this father, widowed father and his son. And it's, for me, that relationship is what is the heart of the show, and it makes it so great. But then let's just bonus here. Saturday Morning, I really think that of all the shows I grew up on in the 70s, it's not my favorite cartoon, but it's, I think, the most influential and most universally beloved of all the ones that are out there. Scooby-Doo. I mean, if someone hasn't watched the original Scooby-Doo, Where Are You?, the first season that premiered on CBS, it's magical Saturday morning cartoons at their very best.
Yeah, Scooby-Doo is a good one. I mean, we all loved it, and Scooby-Doo was great.
Not the later iterations and all that crap, but the early stuff is really good.
Right, exactly. There are some shows that I never got into, that I never really did. I mean, Hazel I don't know if you remember Hazel or not. That was kind of
I
one that
remember it.
really
I
got.
didn't watch it.
Yeah, I think I watched an episode or two. Unfortunately, I think there's a couple out there that I probably would have enjoyed, but I didn't ever get. My Three Sons, I hear, is a very good one, but I never got into it. Did you get into My Three Sons?
I did, but here's the thing: is all the episodes I watched as a kid were the later episodes that were in color, which are the episodes without. I'm drawing a blank. Bill Frawley, the guy that was Fred Mertz on I Love Lucy. He was the original
Yeah.
uncle on My Three Sons, and then he got fired because of his health, and they brought in someone else to play Uncle Charlie, and so I would really love to go back and watch some of those early My Three Sons episodes with Bill Frawley in that, and the Three Sons that I remembered watching were actually not the original Three Sons. There was an older son. I'm drawing a blank on the name of the kid who played him, who left the show after 3 or 4 seasons, and as a result, that one is one where I say I've seen it, but I don't think I've truly seen maybe when it was at its prime or the very best of that show. Shows we didn't talk about either that are fantastic that definitely I think still hold up are like Bewitched and I Dream of Jeannie, The Munsters. There's just so many shows from that era that played in syndication in the 70s. So they were there for the Boomer parents when they were initially debuted, and then Boomer kids when they were playing in reruns in the early 70s.
Oh, we could go on and on about the era of television. And that's what our channels are about. I mean, you know what I mean? That's why we have more than just this episode, and we have all these different aspects of each one of these on our videos and stuff like that. Dave, tell everyone where they can find you on the web, and your channel, a little bit about your channel in case somebody out there knows me but doesn't know you. It might be a weird person out there. I think everybody who knows me through you, basically. But there are a couple people out there who know me independently. But tell us a little bit about where we can about your channel, what you do there, and where we can find you.
The name of my channel is right there on the bottom corner of the screen, so it's easy to find. My channel is my name, so I'm there, and you can. That's going to show up, right, Ian? Those names on the bottom there.
I hope so. I just drug my cursor over it, and it showed up. I hope it shows up there.
Well, if it doesn't, just you look up Dave Sundstrom on YouTube, and you'll find me. And
now you do,
quite frankly,
do a lot of,
go ahead.
I was going to say you do a lot of television, but you used to do some music and stuff too. Is that just kind of faded away? You had a music channel at one time too.
I still have it there, and it's just not something that I'll post something to it every month or two, but
okay.
It's a matter of time, Ian. Right? You know what I'm talking about there, and quite frankly, the ideas that make me the most excited and get me the happiest when I'm working on them are still when I'm talking about TV shows from the 60s and 70s in particular. So you'll see that most of my stuff is about that, but every once in a while there'll be a retro music. I have a retro music channel. And I have another channel that I'm working on called TV Treasures. It's my experimental channel. So if I do something that's just like, it might still be about TV shows, but it's kind of format is different. It's a little bit, I'll throw it over on that just to experiment. So there's that. I actually have, I think there's 6 channels out there, but a lot of them are just kind of little baby channels that I'm just incubating and playing with, and they may sprout and become something, or they may not. So I'd say if you're looking for me, go look for me on my main channel, Dave Sundstrom.
Right. Well, I love watching your stuff. It's always very interesting, all the facts that you give out about, and about these television shows and the why and who got fired and who did this and that kind of thing. And very, very interesting. Hopefully, we might be able to get you this Monday on the live stream to talk about this with the cast. I mean, with the audience.
We'll see. This Monday, we'll see. I'm going to be in the office that week, so we might have to do it another week, but we'll figure it out.
Let's do it the Monday after that to talk about this subject on the live stream. And I want to offer that to people because this is just a podcast. You're just listening to it. And, we'll have this subject so that you can participate and ask your questions and talk about your stuff.
I won't lie to you, Ian. I'm not going to lie to you. I was a little bit disappointed when we were texting back and forth earlier and I found out this was the podcast. Because I love our community. And what I was really looking forward to was the live stream. And just, because I don't live stream as much as I maybe have in the past, any opportunity that I do get to interact with our community, and I say our community because it's definitely a shared community at this point, it's really just it's precious time. So we'll definitely find a way to make it happen at some point in the future, because that is definitely my one of my favorite things to do. Still,
okay, yeah, it is. It's just that for me, it's kind of catch-22 because part of what I do here is the podcast. And for the podcast portion, I want it to be just me and the guest and talking about ideas. But at the same and if we do it live, I try to do kind of a simultaneous thing.
It's different. You can't ignore the community when you do it live.
Right. So I wanted to. That's why I try to do both. I try to do a podcast, and I try to do a live stream based on the podcast, so I get the best of both worlds. All right. Well, everyone, thank you for watching Retro Serial. Subscribe to my channel. Subscribe to Dave's channel. The links will be in the description box below to both of our channels. To my channel, obviously. If you're watching it on my channel. I just released a retro review of Return of the Jedi because, it's 40 years since it's been out. So nostalgia stuff just keeps going on and on because we keep getting older and older. And things keep getting older and older. So keep it up, Dave. I love your channel. You're awesome. You've been a great friend of mine. I tell this to everybody. You were the first person that had a channel of significance who gave me the time of day. So I'll always be grateful for that. So thank you very much, Dave.
Thank you. Appreciate you, Ian.
All right, everybody. Take care, and we will talk to you again real soon. As soon as I learn how to stop the recording here.